The snow fell heavy on Marcus Stone's ranch that Christmas Eve, blanketing the Montana wilderness in deadly silence. He hadn't spoken to another human in 3 years, not since the accident that destroyed his family and left him broken. The barn should have been empty, locked tight against the bitter cold. But there she was, curled in the hay, 9 months pregnant and barely breathing. Her clothes were torn, her face bruised, and when she opened her eyes, pure terror stared back at him. "Please don't turn me in," she whispered through chattering teeth. "He'll kill us both if he finds me." Those words shattered something inside Marcus, because he recognized that look. It was the same fear he'd seen in his wife's eyes the night she died, the same helplessness that had haunted him every day since. But this stranger didn't know who she was talking to. She didn't know that Marcus Stone was once the most decorated FBI agent in the country, or that he'd walked away from everything after failing to save the only person who mattered. Could a man who'd lost everything find the strength to save someone else's life? Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, lantern trembling in his calloused grip. The woman's plea echoed in the silence between them, hanging like frost in the bitter air. 3 years of self-imposed isolation had stripped him down to the bones, leaving behind only guilt and the ghosts of his failures. Yet here was flesh and blood desperation, real as the snow melting from his boots. "Easy," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. The single word came out harsher than intended, and she flinched. He cleared his throat, tried again. "You're hurt." She struggled to sit up, one protective hand cradling her swollen belly. "I'm fine. I just need—" Her words cut off as pain twisted across her features. Not the pain of injury, Marcus realized with growing alarm, but something else entirely. "When's the baby due?" He stepped closer, despite every instinct screaming at him to walk away, to return to his cabin and pretend he'd never found her. It was due last week. She pressed her lips together, breathing through what was obviously a contraction. "But I can't, not here, not now." When the pain passed, she looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds. "You don't understand. If he finds me, we're all dead." Marcus had spent 15 years reading people, interrogating suspects, following leads through the darkest corners of human nature. He knew desperation when he saw it, knew the difference between manipulation and genuine terror. This woman wasn't lying. "Who's looking for you?" She shook her head violently. "I can't tell you. The less you know, the safer you are. Just forget you saw me, please. I'll be gone by morning." Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and she doubled over with a strangled cry. Marcus dropped the lantern and moved without thinking, old training kicking in despite the rust of isolation. He knelt beside her, steadying her shoulders as she rode out the wave of pain. "What's your name?" he asked when she could breathe again. "Sarah." The name came out as barely a whisper. "Sarah, I'm Marcus, and you're not going anywhere tonight." He studied her face in the lamplight, young, maybe mid-20s, with delicate features marked by exhaustion and fear.
"How long since your water broke?"
Her eyes widened. "How did you—" "Lucky guess." "How long?" "Few hours ago, maybe 3. She gripped his arm suddenly, fingers digging in. "You really can't call anyone. No police, no doctors, no one. Promise me." The irony wasn't lost on him. She was begging him not to call the very institution he'd once served with blind dedication, the same badge he'd worn with pride until the night it all fell apart, until his world collapsed in a storm of blood and broken promises. "I promise," he heard himself say. Relief flooded her features, followed immediately by another contraction. This one bent her in half, a low moan escaping her clenched teeth. Marcus counted silently, 45 seconds. When it ended, he helped her lean back against a hay bale. "Sarah, those contractions are getting closer together. This baby's coming whether we're ready or not." Terror flashed in her eyes again, different this time. Not fear of pursuit, but the primal fear of a woman about to give birth alone in a barn, hunted by someone dangerous enough to send her fleeing into a blizzard. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. Marcus looked at this broken woman, at the life struggling to enter the world under impossible circumstances, and felt something crack open inside his chest. For 3 years he'd been dead to everything but his own pain. But sitting here in the hay, watching Sarah fight through another contraction with fierce determination, he remembered what it felt like to matter to someone. He thought of Elena, of promises made and broken, of chances lost forever. Maybe he couldn't save his wife. Maybe he'd failed when it mattered most. But Sarah was here now, real and desperate and counting on him. "You don't have to," Marcus said quietly. "I do." The woman's eyes darted between Jake's face and the shotgun still cradled in his arms. Her breathing came in short, panicked bursts that fogged in the frigid air. Jake could see she was weighing her options: run deeper into the storm or trust a stranger who'd found her at her most vulnerable. "I won't hurt you," he said, slowly lowering the weapon. "But you need medical attention. When's the baby due?" She pressed her back against the stall door, one hand protectively curved over her swollen belly. "Soon," she whispered. Maybe 2 weeks." Jake's jaw tightened. 2 weeks meant she could go into labor any moment, especially under this kind of stress. The nearest hospital was 40 miles through mountain passes that would be impassable until the storm cleared. "What's your name?" "Sarah." The word came out barely audible. "I'm Jake. This is my ranch." He gestured around the barn. "Sarah, I need to know, are you hurt, besides being cold and exhausted?" She shook her head, but Jake noticed how she favored her left side. Her coat was torn at the shoulder, and dark stains that could have been blood or mud covered the fabric. "The house is warm," he said carefully. "I've got food, medical supplies. You can't stay out here. You don't understand." Sarah's voice cracked. "They'll find me. They'll kill us both." The words hit Jake like ice water. He'd spent 5 years on this isolated ranch specifically to avoid anyone who might be looking to kill him. His past was buried deep, but not so deep that the wrong people couldn't dig it up if they had reason to come sniffing around. "Who's looking for you?" Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Men who don't leave witnesses." Jake studied her face in the lantern light. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair escaping from a knit cap and intelligent brown eyes that held too much fear for someone so young. This wasn't some domestic dispute or custody battle. The terror etched in her features spoke of something far more dangerous. "How long have you been running?" 3 days. She winced as another contraction seized her. "I've been walking since my car broke down yesterday morning. 20 miles of rough terrain in a snowstorm while heavily pregnant." Jake felt a grudging respect for her determination to survive, even as alarm bells rang in his head. Getting involved with someone being hunted was exactly what he'd sworn never to do again. But as Sarah doubled over with another contraction, clutching the stall door for support, his decision made itself. "Come on." He set the shotgun aside and stepped forward. "You're no good to anyone if you freeze to death." "I can't." Tears traced frozen paths down her cheeks. "If they find me here, they'll hurt you too. You seem like a good man. I won't have your death on my conscience." Jake almost laughed at the irony. A good man. If only she knew how many deaths were already on his conscience. But that was exactly why he couldn't walk away from this. "Sarah, look at me." He waited until her frightened eyes met his. "I've dealt with dangerous men before. My ranch is isolated, defensible. You're safer here than anywhere else you could reach on foot." It wasn't entirely a lie. The ranch sat in a valley with only one road in or out, and Jake had spent considerable time and money ensuring he'd have advance warning if anyone came looking for him. Motion sensors, cameras, and clear sight lines covered every approach. "Besides," he added, "that baby's not going to wait for convenient timing. You need shelter, and you need it now." As if summoned by his words, another contraction gripped Sarah. This one lasted longer, and when it passed, she sagged against the wooden planks. "Okay," she breathed. "But if this goes wrong, it won't." Jake moved to her side, offering his arm for support. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though he could feel her trembling as she leaned into him. They made slow progress across the barn, Sarah stopping twice more as contractions seized her. By the time they reached the door, Jake was calculating hours rather than weeks until this baby arrived. The wind hit them like a physical blow as they stepped outside. Sarah stumbled, and Jake caught her against his chest, feeling how small and fragile she was beneath the bulky coat. For a moment, the scent of her hair, somehow still carrying traces of vanilla despite her ordeal, transported him to another time, another woman he'd failed to protect. He shoved the memory aside. This time would be different. It had to be. "Almost there," he murmured, guiding her toward the lights of his house. Behind them, the barn door slammed shut in the wind, the sound echoing like a gunshot across the valley. The woman's eyes darted between Jake's face and the shotgun still resting against his thigh. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, each exhale visible in the frigid barn air. Jake could see the exhaustion etched into every line of her face, the way her shoulders trembled from more than just the cold. "You said someone's coming for you," Jake said, his voice deliberately calm. "Who?" She pressed her lips together, shaking her head. "You wouldn't understand. You'd just—" Her words cut off as a sharp pain crossed her features. She gripped her swollen belly, doubling forward. Jake was beside her an instant, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not quite touching. "When's the baby due?" "Soon," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Too soon." The wind howled outside, rattling the barn doors. Snow had been falling steadily for hours, and by morning the mountain roads would be impassable. Whatever trouble she was running from, they were both trapped here now. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked up at him, studying his weathered face in the lamplight. Sarah Chen." Jake nodded slowly. "Well, Sarah, you're in no condition to go anywhere tonight. Storm's getting worse." He gestured toward the barn doors, where wind whistled through the gaps. "But if someone's really after you, I need to know what I'm dealing with." Sarah's laugh was bitter and sharp. "What you're dealing with, you have no idea." She struggled to sit up straighter, wincing. "My husband isn't just anyone. He's—" She stopped, her eyes growing distant and afraid. "He did this to you?" Jake's voice carried a dangerous edge as his gaze took in the bruise on her cheek, the careful way she held herself. Among other things, Sarah's hand moved protectively over her belly. "But it's not just about me anymore. He's involved with people, dangerous people, and I found out something I wasn't supposed to know." Jake felt a familiar chill that had nothing to do with the December air, the kind of chill that came from recognizing the shadow of his own past. "What kind of people?" Sarah met his eyes, and he saw desperation there, raw and consuming, the kind who make problems disappear, permanently. She took a shaky breath. "My husband works for Marcus Volkov." The name hit Jake like a physical blow. He went completely still, every muscle in his body tensing. Marcus Volkov. After 6 years of hiding, of building a quiet life in these mountains, that name could still turn his blood to ice water. "You know him." Sarah's voice was flat with resignation. "I can see it in your face. God. Even here, even in the middle of nowhere, how do you know that name?" Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. "'Cause my husband is his accountant. Was his accountant until I took his files." Sarah's hand moved to the bag beside her. "Everything's in here. Every transaction, every payoff, every murder they've covered up. I thought I could trade it, the information for my freedom. But David found out before I could disappear." Jake's mind raced. Marcus Volkov had tentacles that reached across 3 states, built an empire on fear and blood money. Jake knew because he'd once been part of that empire. Before the betrayal, before he'd had to disappear himself. "You have his files," Jake said slowly. "Financial records. Everything from the last 5 years, including something called the Christmas Protocol." Sarah watched Jake's face carefully. "That means something to you, doesn't it?" Jake's blood went cold. The Christmas Protocol was Volkov's annual house cleaning, eliminating loose ends, witnesses, anyone who knew too much. It always happened during the holidays when people's disappearances could be explained away as travel, family visits gone wrong. When did you take the files? He asked. 3 days ago. I've been running ever since. Sarah's voice cracked. David called his contacts the moment he realized what was missing. They'll be coming, storm or no storm. They have to. I know too much. Jake stood abruptly, pacing to the barn doors. Through the gaps he could see nothing but swirling snow and darkness. But somewhere out there, professional killers were making their way toward his sanctuary, toward the life he'd spent 6 years building. He had choices to make. He could load Sarah in his truck, take her down to the sheriff's office in town, let someone else deal with Volkov's cleanup crew, keep his own secrets buried. Or he could tell her the truth about who he really was, about why Marcus Volkov's name made his hands shake and his chest tighten with old rage. Jake turned back to Sarah, who was watching him with growing alarm. "There's something you need to know about me," he said quietly. "Something that changes everything." Sarah's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. "Who are you?" Jake picked up the shotgun, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency. When he looked up, his expression had transformed from that of a simple rancher to something much more dangerous. Someone Marcus Volkov's been hunting for a very long time. The coffee had gone cold between them, but neither seemed to notice. Sarah's hands trembled as she wrapped them around the ceramic mug, her knuckles white against the faded blue pattern. Marcus studied her face in the lamplight, noting the way her eyes darted toward the window every few seconds, as if expecting shadows to materialize from the darkness beyond. "How far along?" he asked quietly. 7 months. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe 8. I haven't seen a doctor in—" She trailed off, her free hand moving protectively over her swollen belly. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He'd delivered enough calves to recognize the signs of a difficult pregnancy, and Sarah showed all of them. The pallor, the way she held herself, the exhaustion that went bone deep. She needed medical attention, not just shelter. "There's a clinic in Millbrook," he said. 20 minutes down the mountain. Doc Henderson doesn't ask too many questions." Sarah's head snapped up, fear flashing across her features. "No, no doctors, no hospitals. They'll find me." "Who will find you?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her words came out in a rush, as if saying them quickly might lessen their impact. "My husband, ex-husband, David Chambers." She looked at Marcus with desperate eyes. "Have you heard of him?" The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. David Chambers, real estate mogul, political donor, the kind of man whose photograph appeared in newspapers shaking hands with governors and senators. Marcus had seen that face before, though not in any newspaper. He'd seen it 3 years ago in a different context entirely, one that still visited his nightmares. "I know who he is," Marcus said carefully. "Then you know what kind of man he is, what kind of power he has." Sarah's voice broke. "He has people everywhere. Police, judges, doctors. There's nowhere I can go that he won't find me." Marcus stood abruptly, turning toward the window. Outside, snow continued to fall, each flake catching the light from the kitchen before disappearing into the darkness. His reflection stared back at him. A man trying to escape his own ghosts, now confronted with someone else's. "Why did you run?" he asked without turning around. "Because I found out what he really is, what he's been doing." Sarah's reflection appeared beside his in the glass. There were files in his office, photos, records of things that— She shuddered. "I took copies before I left. Evidence of murders, bribes, worse things. Things that could destroy him." Marcus closed his eyes. 3 years ago, he'd been Detective Marcus Kane, following a money trail that led straight to David Chambers. He'd gotten too close, uncovered too much. The night he'd planned to make his arrest, everything had gone wrong. His partner was killed, witnesses disappeared, and Marcus had barely escaped with his life. The official report blamed him for compromising the investigation for his partner's death. No one believed his claims about Chambers' involvement. "Where are these files now?" he asked. "Hidden, safe. David knows I have them, which is why he'll never stop looking. Sarah moved closer to the window. I was stupid to think I could expose him through normal channels. The first lawyer I contacted was dead within a week, made to look like a heart attack, but I know better. Marcus turned to face her. So you've been running ever since? For months. Using cash, staying in cheap motels, always moving, but the baby... She pressed both hands to her stomach. I can't keep this up much longer. I needed somewhere safe to rest, to figure out what to do next. And you chose my barn randomly? Sarah hesitated. Not exactly. I'd been watching your place for 2 days. You live alone, you keep to yourself, no visitors. I thought maybe you were someone who valued privacy, who might understand. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. She was right about his valuing privacy, but for all the wrong reasons. He'd chosen this isolated existence specifically to avoid situations like this, to keep his past buried where it couldn't hurt anyone else. Sarah, he said slowly, there's something you need to know. Before he could continue, a sound cut through the night, the distant rumble of vehicles coming up the mountain road. Sarah went rigid, her face draining of what little color remained. They found me, she whispered. Marcus moved quickly to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. Headlights. Still far down the winding road, but climbing steadily. 2 vehicles, maybe 3. How? Sarah's voice rose in panic. How did they find me so fast? Marcus was already moving, grabbing his coat from a chair. Doesn't matter now, we need to go. We? Sarah stared at him. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Marcus paused at the door, looking back at this frightened woman who'd stumbled into his carefully constructed sanctuary. Because, he said grimly, David Chambers killed my partner, and it's time someone made him pay. The coffee had gone cold between them, but neither seemed to notice. Sarah's hands trembled as she set down her mug, the ceramic clicking against the wooden table like a countdown timer. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the windows with icy fingers that seemed to be reaching for her. There's something else, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. Something I haven't told you about Marcus. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd been expecting this. In his experience, the truth always came in layers, each one more dangerous than the last. Go on. He's not just some abusive boyfriend. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly, protective and desperate. He's DEA, has been for 8 years, and he's been using his position to... She swallowed hard. To cover for the people he's supposed to be catching. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. DEA, federal agent. The very people who'd been hunting him for the past 5 years, the ones whose faces haunted his nightmares and kept him isolated on this godforsaken ranch. His coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor in a spray of porcelain and bitter liquid. Jesus Christ! He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floorboards. You brought a federal agent to my door. He doesn't know I'm here, Sarah said quickly, rising from her own chair despite the obvious pain it caused her. I swear to you, Jack, I was careful. I made sure... Careful? Jack's voice cracked like a whip. Lady, you don't understand what you've done. He began pacing, his mind racing through contingencies he'd hoped never to use. The emergency cash hidden in the barn, the fake IDs locked in his bedroom safe, the truck with the clean plates parked in the old grain silo. Please, just listen to me. Sarah's voice broke, tears streaming down her face. Marcus has been taking money from a trafficking ring. Drugs, guns, people, they move everything through the territory he patrols. When I found the evidence, when I saw the photos of what they do to the women and children... She pressed her hands to her mouth, choking back a sob. I couldn't stay silent. I went to his superior, Agent Rodriguez, thinking I could trust him. Jack stopped pacing. And... Rodriguez is in on it too. Half the field office is. When Marcus found out what I'd done, he came home that night different. Dangerous. He said I'd signed all our death warrants, but that he had a way to fix it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He said all I had to do was disappear, permanently. The kitchen fell silent except for the storm's relentless assault on the house. Jack stared at Sarah, seeing not just a desperate woman anymore, but a walking target with a federal bullseye painted on her back. And she was standing in his kitchen, bleeding information that could either save them both or get them killed. "The baby," he said slowly. "It's not his." Sarah's sharp intake of breath told him he was right. "How did you—" "The timing, the way you talk about it. You love this child, but there's no trace of him in your voice when you mention it." Jack moved closer, his voice gentler now. "Who's the father?" "Agent Michael Torres, Marcus's former partner." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. He was investigating the same trafficking ring from the inside. When he got too close, they transferred him out, but not before— She touched her stomach again. "Not before we fell in love. Michael was going to blow the whistle, expose everything. 3 months ago they found his body in a motel room outside Phoenix, apparent suicide." Jack felt the familiar chill of recognition, the same feeling he'd had years ago when his own world had started crumbling around him. "But you don't believe it was suicide?" "Michael would never have left me, never have left his child." Her voice hardened with certainty. "Marcus killed him or had him killed. And now he knows the baby isn't his. He's been pretending, biding his time, waiting for the right moment to clean up all the loose ends. And you're the biggest loose end of all. I have copies of everything Michael gathered. Photos, financial records, communication logs. Enough to bring down the entire network. Marcus knows I have it, and he knows that as long as I'm alive, I'm a threat." Jack ran his hands through his hair, his mind working furiously. A corrupt DEA network, a murdered federal agent, evidence of trafficking operations, and, sitting in his kitchen, a pregnant woman who represented the key to either exposing it all or dying in the attempt. The irony wasn't lost on him. For 5 years he'd been running from the law, hiding from the very agencies Sarah was trying to expose. Now she was asking him to help her bring down the same people who'd been hunting him. "Sarah," he said quietly, "what exactly are you asking me to do?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Jake watched Elena's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been relief before settling into wariness. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the cabin walls, but neither of them moved. "That's impossible," she whispered finally. "Marcus Volkov died in that explosion. Everyone knows that." Jake, Marcus, let out a bitter laugh. "Everyone knows what they were meant to know. The FBI needed me gone, and I needed to disappear. Turns out we both got what we wanted." He rubbed his scarred hands together, feeling the phantom ache of burns that had healed years ago. At least until now. Elena shifted on the couch, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. "If you're really Marcus Volkov, then you know." "I know Viktor Kozlov would skin you alive if he found you here. I know he'd probably do the same to me for helping you." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Through the frost-covered glass he could see the storm hadn't let up. "What I don't know is why you'd risk everything to run from him now, when you're this pregnant. What did you take?" The color drained from Elena's face. "How did you—" "Because I know my brother. He wouldn't hunt you down like this unless you had something he needed, something worth killing for." Marcus turned back to face her, his grey eyes hard. "So what is it? Money? Information? Drugs?" Elena's jaw tightened. "Files, financial records, shipping manifests, communication logs, everything the FBI would need to bring down his entire operation." She met his gaze defiantly. "And before you ask, no, I'm not going to tell you where they are." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Those files represented years of his brother's work and his own, every dirty deal, every payment, every carefully orchestrated crime they'd committed together. If the FBI got their hands on that information, "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly. "I know exactly what I've done. I've given my child a chance at a life that doesn't involve blood, money, and fear." Elena struggled to her feet, swaying slightly. "My baby will never grow up in that world. Your baby won't grow up at all if Victor finds you." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elena's defiance cracked, revealing the terror beneath. "He won't find me here. No one knows about this place." Marcus wanted to believe that. He'd spent 5 years building this sanctuary, this carefully constructed life where Marcus Volkov didn't exist. But Victor was nothing if not thorough, and desperate men made dangerous mistakes. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. "Months. Since I found out I was pregnant." Elena sank back down, exhaustion written in every line of her body. "I've been copying files, making contacts, preparing safe houses. I even have a new identity waiting, birth certificate, social security number, everything. Then why aren't you using it? Why come here?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because 3 days ago, Victor figured out what I was doing. He killed my contact, burned my safe house, and froze every account I'd set up. The only reason I got away was because I was at the doctor when he came for me." Marcus felt the familiar weight of his old life pressing down on him. He'd known this peace was temporary, but he'd hoped for more time. "And you came here because you think the FBI will protect you?" "I came here because I ran out of options." Elena looked up at him, and he saw his own desperation reflected in her eyes. "But maybe this is better. If you really are Marcus Volkov, then you know things the FBI doesn't. You could help me." The suggestion hit him like a physical blow. "Help you destroy my brother. Help you destroy everything I built." "Help me destroy everything that's already destroying itself," she shot back. "You think Victor's operation is the same as when you left? He's gotten sloppy, paranoid. He's making enemies faster than he can eliminate them. It's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down anyway." Marcus turned back to the window, watching the snow fall. She wasn't wrong. Even from his self-imposed exile, he'd heard whispers. Victor's increasing volatility, his expanding territory, the growing attention from law enforcement. The empire they'd built together was crumbling, and his brother was accelerating its destruction with every reckless decision. But helping Elena meant betraying everything he'd once been. It meant choosing a side in a war he'd spent 5 years avoiding. "If I do this," he said slowly, not turning around, "there's no going back. For either of us." "There was never going back," Elena replied. "The moment I took those files, the moment you opened that barn door, we were both already dead. The question is whether we're going to die for something worthwhile." The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline silence that seemed to magnify every creak of the old house. Maya sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, watching Jake move with practiced efficiency as he prepared breakfast. The domesticity of the moment felt surreal after everything that had transpired the night before. She studied his profile as he worked at the stove, noting the tension that never quite left his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly flicked toward the windows. He'd changed clothes since their midnight confrontation, trading his blood-stained shirt for a faded flannel that made him look almost approachable. Almost. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. Jake glanced over his shoulder. "Eat? Pretty sure you do. Doctor's orders and all." "You know what I mean." Maya shifted uncomfortably, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. "Help me. I've brought enough trouble to your doorstep already." He turned off the burner and faced her fully, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. "You think this is about helping you?" The question caught her off guard. "Isn't it?" Maybe it started that way. He moved to the window, parting the curtain to scan the driveway. But Marcus Kane isn't the type to let loose ends dangle. He'll keep coming, whether you're here or halfway across the country. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "So this is about self-preservation?" "Partly." Jake's honesty was brutal but somehow reassuring. "But there's more to it than that." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through something before setting it on the counter between them. Maya leaned forward to see a news article from 3 years ago. Federal prosecutor's family killed in home invasion. Her blood turned to ice as she read the details. A wife, and teenage daughter murdered in what police initially believed was a robbery gone wrong. But the prosecutor, David Chen, had been building a case against a major crime syndicate. The case fell apart after his family's death when Chen suffered a complete breakdown and could no longer function. Marcus Kane's people, Jake said quietly. Chen was getting too close, so they sent a message. Maya looked up at him, understanding dawning. You knew Chen. We worked together. He was a good man, dedicated to putting the right people behind bars. Jake's jaw tightened. After the murders, he disappeared completely. Some say he killed himself. Others think Kane finished the job, but you think differently. Jake was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out another photo. This one showed two men at what looked like a law enforcement barbecue. One was clearly Chen, younger and smiling. The other took Maya a moment to recognize without the beard and hardened expression. Jake Murphy, she whispered, reading the caption. Assistant District Attorney? Former, he corrected. I died in a car accident 2 years ago. At least, that's what the official records say. Maya's mind raced as pieces clicked into place. You faked your death. With Chen's help, ironically. He'd learned how to disappear by then, taught me everything he knew before he vanished for good. Jake sat down across from her. Kane was systematically eliminating everyone who'd been involved in building cases against him. I was next on the list. So, you became a rancher. Best way to hide is in plain sight. Small town, cash transactions, minimal digital footprint. He gestured around the modest kitchen. Not exactly the life I'd planned, but it beats being 6 feet under. Maya absorbed this revelation, understanding now why he'd reacted so strongly to her presence, to the mention of Kane's name. I've ruined everything for you. No, Jake said firmly. You've given me something I lost when I came here. What's that? A reason to fight back. Before Maya could respond, Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. We need to move. Now. What is it? Text from my neighbor down the valley. Says there are cars with out-of-state plates asking questions about strangers in the area. He was already moving, grabbing keys and a heavy jacket. Kane's people are closer than I thought. Maya struggled to stand, her pregnancy making quick movements difficult. Where can we go? There's a safe house Chen told me about before he disappeared. It's a long shot. But if it's still operational... Jake helped her to her feet, his touch surprisingly gentle. Can you travel? Do I have a choice? There's always a choice. His eyes met hers, and she saw something she hadn't noticed before, a flicker of the man he used to be, the prosecutor who'd fought for justice. You can stay here, take your chances with Kane's people, or you can trust me. Maya thought of her baby, of the life growing inside her that deserved a chance at safety. She thought of Marcus Kane's cold smile and David's lifeless eyes. I trust you, she said. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline world that glittered under the pale morning sun. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching steam rise from her coffee cup as she observed Jake clearing snow from the porch steps. His movements were methodical, purposeful, but she could see the tension in his shoulders that hadn't left since Marcus's call the night before. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. The child seemed to sense her anxiety, responding with sharp kicks that made her wince. Everything had felt so safe just hours ago, wrapped in Jake's arms before the fire. Now reality was crashing back with brutal clarity. We need to talk. Jake's voice came from behind her as he stepped through the door, bringing cold air and the scent of snow with him. She turned to face him, noting the way his jaw was set, the careful distance he maintained between them. About last night? About what happens next. He pulled off his gloves and hat, running a hand through his dark hair. Marcus wasn't wrong. They will come looking, and when they do, you'll turn me in. The words came out flatter than she intended. Jake's eyes flashed with something that might have been hurt. Is that what you think of me? Sarah studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. I think you're a practical man who's built a life here. I think you have things to protect. You're right. He moved to the coffee pot, pouring himself a cup with steady hands. I do have things to protect, but you're wrong about what I do. She waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. There's a cabin about 15 miles north of here, up in the high country. It's been abandoned for years, but it's solid. Has a well, a wood stove, enough supplies to last through winter. He took a sip of coffee, his gaze never leaving hers. No one knows about it except me. Why are you telling me this? Because in 2 hours, I'm going to drive you there. We'll make it look like you headed south toward the highway. I'll even leave some tracks, maybe drop something of yours along the way. Sarah felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. And then you disappear until spring. Until after the baby comes. Until we figure out something permanent. The word "we" hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them had acknowledged. Jake. She moved toward him, setting her cup aside. What Marcus said about your past doesn't matter right now. His voice carried a finality that made her step back. What matters is keeping you safe. But Sarah had spent too many years hiding from truth to accept that answer. It does matter. If we're going to... She stopped herself before she could finish the thought, before she could voice the hope that had taken root somewhere between his gentle touch and his willingness to risk everything for her. If we're going to what? His voice was softer now, and he moved closer. She looked up at him, this man who had appeared in her darkest hour like something out of a dream. I can't ask you to throw away your life for me. For us, you're not asking, I'm choosing. The simple words hit her with unexpected force. When had anyone ever chosen her? When had she ever been worth the risk? What if I told you that everything you think you know about why I'm running is a lie? The question escaped before she could stop it, born from the crushing weight of deception that had become second nature. Jake went very still. What do you mean? Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the moment balance on a knife's edge. She could tell him everything now. About David, about the real reason she'd fled, about the truth that would make her seem less like a victim and more like something else entirely. Or she could let him continue believing the version she'd crafted, the one that cast her as nothing more than an abused wife seeking freedom. Sarah. His hand touched her cheek, and she opened her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Whatever it is, whatever you've done or haven't done, it doesn't change anything. You don't know that. Yes, I do. His thumb traced along her jawline. Because I've done things that would make you run from me without looking back, and if you can stand here in my kitchen drinking my coffee and letting me touch you, then I can handle whatever secret you think is so terrible. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if protesting the web of lies surrounding its existence. Sarah covered Jake's hand with hers, memorizing the warmth of his skin, the calluses that spoke of honest work and simple truths. The cabin, she said finally. How soon can we leave? Something shifted in his expression, relief, perhaps, or disappointment that she hadn't trusted him with whatever she was holding back. 1 hour, he said. Pack light. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline world that sparkled under the morning sun. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching the snow-laden branches bend gracefully in the gentle breeze. 3 days had passed since Marcus revealed his connection to her past, and she still felt like she was walking on shifting ground. Your tea's getting cold, Marcus said from behind her, his voice careful and measured. He'd been like this since their conversation, maintaining distance while somehow staying close enough to catch her if she fell. She turned, accepting the warm mug with hands that trembled slightly. The baby had been restless all night, and she wondered if somehow her anxiety was transferring through to the child. I keep thinking about what you said, about watching me. Marcus settled into the chair across from her, his weathered hands wrapped around his own coffee. I never wanted you to know. It was supposed to stay buried. But didn't stay buried, did it? Sarah's voice carried an edge she hadn't intended. None of this is buried. David found you, he found me, and now... She gestured helplessly around the kitchen that had become both sanctuary and trap. The satellite phone on the counter buzzed, its harsh tone cutting through the morning quiet. They both froze, staring at the device as if it might explode. Marcus reached for it slowly. Henderson. Sarah watched his face change, saw the color drain from his cheeks as he listened to whoever was on the other end. His eyes found hers, and she saw something there that made her stomach clench with fear. "How many?" he asked quietly. A pause. "How long do we have?" The conversation lasted another minute, filled with terse responses and careful questions. When Marcus finally hung up, the silence stretched between them like a taut wire. "They found the cabin," he said simply. "David's people. They're working their way through every property in a 50-mile radius." Sarah felt the room tilt slightly. "How long?" "Jake thinks maybe 8 hours before they reach us, if they're being thorough. Less if they get lucky. 8 hours. Sarah pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the baby respond with a sharp kick. "We have to run." "No." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Running won't work. Not in your condition. Not with the road still impassable from the storm. They have resources we don't. Helicopters, thermal imaging, manpower. So what are you suggesting? That we just wait here for them to find us?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying something beyond the frost-covered glass. When he spoke, his voice was steady but resigned. "There's another way, but you're not going to like it." Sarah set down her tea with shaking hands. "Tell me." "I call David directly. I tell him I have something he wants. We arrange a trade." The words hit her like ice water. "A trade?" "Marcus, no. You can't." "For you and the baby." He turned to face her, and she saw in his expression the same look he'd worn that night in the courtroom. Determined, protective, utterly resolved. "It's what he really wants anyway. You said it yourself. This is about more than just keeping you quiet. He wants revenge. It's not your choice." "Like hell it isn't." The force of her own voice surprised her. "I'm not some helpless victim you need to rescue, Marcus. I chose to come here. I chose to trust you, and I'm choosing to fight." Marcus stepped closer, his hands reaching out to steady her. "Sarah, be reasonable. You can barely walk without pain. The baby is exactly why I can't run." She caught his hands in hers, squeezing tight. "Do you think I want my child to grow up knowing their mother was saved because a good man died in her place? Do you think I could live with that?" For the first time since she'd known him, Marcus looked uncertain. "Then what do you suggest?" Sarah felt something shift inside her, a strength she'd forgotten she possessed. "We fight together. You know this land better than anyone. You've been preparing for something like this for years, haven't you?" Marcus's expression grew guarded. "What do you mean?" "The guns, the security system, the way you live out here like you're waiting for something." Sarah moved closer, studying his face. "You've been expecting this confrontation for a long time, so stop treating me like I'm made of glass and start treating me like your partner." Outside, a hawk circled high overhead, riding the thermals with predatory grace. Marcus watched it for a moment, then looked back at her with something like respect in his eyes. "There are things about this place you don't know," he said quietly. "Things I built after I came here. But Sarah, if we do this, if we make our stand here, there's no going back. Win or lose, everything changes." Sarah felt the baby kick again, stronger this time, as if responding to her resolve. "Everything already changed the moment I knocked on your door." The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline world that sparkled under the morning sun. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching Jack trudge through knee-deep snow toward the barn, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Her hand unconsciously moved to her belly, where the baby had been unusually quiet since yesterday's ordeal. She'd barely slept, her mind churning with everything Jack had revealed about Marcus, about the network of corruption that reached far beyond what she'd imagined. The coffee in her hands had grown cold while she wrestled with a terrible realization. Running wasn't going to be enough anymore. The phone rang, shattering the morning quiet. Sarah froze, staring at the old rotary model on the kitchen counter. It rang again, insistent and somehow ominous in the stillness of the house. On the third ring, She lifted the receiver with trembling fingers. "Hello?" Silence stretched across the line, filled only with the faint crackle of static. Then a voice she'd hoped never to hear again slithered through the speaker. "Hello, Sarah. Marcus." Her blood turned to ice. "I know you're there," he continued, his tone conversational, almost gentle. "You've led me on quite a chase, my dear, but it's time to come home now." "How did you?" The words died in her throat as the implications crashed over her. If Marcus had this number, he knew exactly where she was. "How did I find you?" Marcus chuckled, a sound that made her skin crawl. "You always underestimated me, Sarah. Did you really think I wouldn't have contingencies? That I wouldn't have people watching every safe house, every refuge you might run to?" Sarah's eyes darted toward the window, searching the tree line for any sign of movement, any glint of metal that might betray a sniper's scope. "Jack doesn't know anything. Leave him out of this." "Jack Sullivan." The amusement in Marcus's voice deepened. "Oh, but that's where you're wrong. Mr. Sullivan knows quite a lot, actually. More than you realize." Confusion clouded her thoughts. "What are you talking about?" "Ask him about Operation Shadowfall. Ask him about the warehouse in Portland, 3 years ago. Ask him why a dead man is so eager to protect you." The line went dead. Sarah stood frozen, the dial tone humming in her ear like an accusation. Operation Shadowfall. The name meant nothing to her, but the certainty in Marcus's voice suggested it should. Her mind raced, trying to piece together fragments of conversations, the haunted look in Jack's eyes when he spoke about his past, the way he'd known exactly how dangerous Marcus was without her having to explain. The front door slammed open, making her jump. Jack's boots thundered across the hardwood as he burst into the kitchen, his face flushed from cold and something that looked like panic. "We need to leave," he said without preamble, already moving toward the window to scan the horizon. "Now. I found tracks around the property line, at least 4 men, maybe more. They're closing in." Sarah set down the phone carefully, her movements deliberate despite the chaos erupting around her. "Tell me about Operation Shadowfall." Jack went perfectly still. The color drained from his face so completely that she thought he might collapse. When he turned to look at her, his eyes held a devastation that made her chest ache. "How do you know that name?" Marcus called. "He knows we're here, Jack. He knows about you." She stepped closer, studying his face for any hint of deception. "What aren't you telling me?" Jack's shoulders sagged as if the weight of years suddenly pressed down on him. He moved to the kitchen table and sank into a chair, his hands shaking as he buried his face in them. 3 years ago, I was part of a joint task force investigating arms trafficking on the West Coast," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'd been tracking a major player for months, someone connected to high-level government officials. The warehouse in Portland was supposed to be a routine raid." Sarah's heart began to race. "What happened?" "We were set up. The intel was bad, or planted. Most of my team died in the explosion that followed." He looked up at her, his eyes hollow with grief and guilt. "The official report said I died too. It was easier that way. Safer for everyone involved." "Safer from who?" Jack met her gaze, and she saw the terrible truth there before he spoke the words. "From Marcus Blackwood. He was the one we were investigating, Sarah. The arms dealer, the corrupt official pulling strings from the shadows. He had people inside our operation, people who sold us out." Jack's voice broke. "I've been hiding from him for 3 years, just like you. When you told me your story, when you said his name, I knew this day would come." Outside, the distant rumble of engines carried across the frozen landscape, growing closer with each passing second. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline world that glittered under the morning sun. Maya sat at the kitchen table, watching Jack through the window as he checked on the horses. 3 days had passed since her revelation about Marcus, and the weight of unspoken truths hung between them like morning mist. Her phone buzzed against the wooden surface. "Unknown number. I know where you are, Maya. You can't hide forever." Her blood turned to ice. Marcus had found her. Jack's boots stomped on the porch, and she quickly deleted the message, forcing her expression into something resembling calm. He entered with a blast of cold air, his cheeks ruddy from the wind. "Roads are finally clear," he announced, unwinding his scarf. "If you wanted to—" He stopped mid-sentence, studying her face. "What's wrong?" Maya's hands trembled as she placed the phone face down. "Nothing. Just tired." Jack's eyes narrowed. He'd learned to read her tells over the past week, the way she touched her throat when she lied, how her breathing quickened when fear crept in. He crossed the room in 3 strides and gently turned the phone over. Another message had appeared. "The baby belongs with its father." "Son of a bitch," Jack muttered. "How did he get this number?" "I don't know." Maya's voice broke. "I changed it twice. He has connections everywhere. Police, private investigators, people in the phone companies. I told you, there's nowhere I can hide from him." Jack's jaw tightened as he read the messages. The protective fury that rose in his chest surprised him with its intensity. For years he'd lived in emotional isolation, keeping everyone at arm's length. But Maya had slipped past his defenses, and now the thought of anyone hurting her made his vision blur with rage. "We need to go," Maya said, standing abruptly. "I've put you in enough danger. If he finds me here—" "No." Jack's voice was steel. "You're not running anymore. You don't understand what he's capable of. Marcus doesn't just destroy the people who cross him. He destroys everyone around them, their families, their friends, anyone who helped them." She pressed her hands against her belly. "I won't let him hurt you because of me." Jack caught her hands, stilling their nervous movement. "Maya, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, and he saw the same trapped desperation that had driven her into his barn that Christmas Eve. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly, "about my past, about why I really live out here alone." Maya's breath caught. She'd sensed secrets in him from the beginning, the way he never talked about family, how he seemed to know things about running and hiding that went beyond mere intuition. "My real name isn't Jack Morrison," he began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. "It's Jake Morelli. I was a federal prosecutor in Chicago, specializing in organized crime cases." Maya's eyes widened. The pieces began clicking into place, his protective instincts, the way he'd immediately understood her fear, the careful way he'd questioned her about Marcus. 7 years ago, I was building a case against Vincent Castellano, crime family boss, untouchable for decades. But I'd found a witness, a bookkeeper who could tie Castellano to money laundering, murder, everything. Jack's hands tightened on hers. The night before the grand jury hearing, they killed her, made it look like a car accident, but I knew better. What happened? I had 2 choices. Drop the case and let a killer walk free, or press forward knowing they'd come for me next. His smile was bitter. I chose option 3, faked my own death, entered witness protection unofficially. The feds couldn't guarantee my safety, so I disappeared completely. Maya stared at him, processing this revelation. The quiet rancher who'd saved her was himself a fugitive, someone who'd given up everything to fight monsters like the ones she was running from. "The point is," Jack continued, "I know how to disappear. I know how to fight back. And I know exactly what kind of man your Marcus Wellington is. You know him, not personally, but his type. Rich, connected, thinks he owns everything and everyone around him. Men like that have one weakness, their ego. They can't stand being outsmarted by people they consider beneath them." Maya pulled her hands free, shaking her head. "This isn't your fight, Jack. Jake, whatever your name is. It became my fight the moment I let you into my life." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. "I've been running for 7 years, Maya. Hiding, surviving, but not really living. You changed that." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a call from Marcus himself. Jack's eyes met hers, and she saw something she'd never expected to see again: hope. "Answer it," he said quietly. "It's time to stop running." The abandoned mining camp sat like a graveyard of broken dreams against the mountainside, its skeletal structures casting jagged shadows in the pale morning light. Jake pulled the truck to a stop behind a collapsed loading dock, the engine's rumble echoing off the canyon walls before falling silent. "This is it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she surveyed the desolate landscape of rusted equipment and crumbling buildings. "Safe house isn't always pretty," Jake replied, shouldering the duffel bag containing their meager supplies. "But Marcus knows these mountains better than anyone. If he says we'll be safe here, we will be." They made their way through the debris-strewn path toward what had once been the foreman's office, now little more than 4 walls and a questionable roof. Sarah moved carefully, one hand pressed to her lower back, the other instinctively protecting her belly. The baby had been restless all night, as if sensing the danger that pursued them. Marcus emerged from the shadows of the building like a ghost, materializing from the mountain itself. His weathered face broke into a grim smile as he embraced Jake, but his eyes remained hard, alert. "Wasn't sure you'd make it," Marcus said. "Blackwood's men have been crawling all over the main road since dawn." They found the motel. Jake's blood ran cold. "Anyone hurt?" "Manager's in the hospital. Blackwood's getting desperate, and desperate men don't ask questions politely." Marcus turned to Sarah, his expression softening slightly. "Ma'am, I've got the back room set up for you. It's not much, but it's warm and dry." Sarah nodded gratefully, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. As she disappeared into the building, Marcus grabbed Jake's arm. They walked to the edge of the camp, where the mountain dropped away into a dizzying valley. The isolation was complete here, cut off from the world below, but Jake knew it was temporary at best. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. "Maybe a day, 2 if we're lucky, but Jake—" Marcus hesitated, something unusual for a man who'd never minced words. "There's something else. I made some calls, reached out to old contacts. That woman in there, the situation's worse than you know." Jake felt his stomach clench. "What do you mean?" "Blackwood isn't just trying to silence her testimony about the human trafficking. The baby she's carrying, it's leverage. Someone very powerful wants that child, and they're willing to kill for it." Marcus pulled out a crumpled photograph, handing it to Jake. "Recognize him?" The image showed a distinguished man in an expensive suit, silver hair perfectly styled, cold eyes that Jake had hoped never to see again. The world tilted beneath his feet. "Vincent Kane," Jake breathed. "Your old business partner, the one who ordered the hit on your family." Marcus's voice was grim. "This goes deeper than we thought, Jake. Way deeper." The pieces suddenly clicked together in Jake's mind, like bullets sliding into a chamber. The trafficking ring, Blackwood's desperation, Sarah's terror, it all connected back to Kane, to the empire Jake had helped build and then brought down in flames. "She doesn't know," Jake said, more to himself than to Marcus. "Know what?" "Who I really am. What I did." Jake stared at the photograph, remembering another life, another man who had worn his face but possessed no conscience. If Kane wants that baby, it's not random. Sarah must have seen something, known something that connects to the old operations. Or, Marcus said carefully, the baby's father is someone Kane has an interest in controlling. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. Sarah had been vague about the father, claiming only that he was out of the picture. But if Kane was involved, nothing was ever that simple. A scream from inside the building shattered his thoughts. Both men ran, weapons drawn, but the sound that greeted them wasn't danger, it was pain. Sarah was doubled over in the makeshift bedroom, her face contorted in agony. "The baby," she gasped. "Something's wrong." Jake holstered his gun and knelt beside her, his training from another life kicking in. "How long have you been having contractions?" "Since yesterday, but they're getting stronger." Her grip on his arm was desperate. "It's too early. The baby isn't ready." Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Nearest hospital is 40 miles through Blackwood's roadblocks." Jake's mind raced through impossible calculations. Stay here and risk losing both Sarah and the baby to complications, or venture out and risk losing them to Blackwood's bullets. Either choice could be fatal. Sarah's eyes found his, filled with a trust he didn't deserve. "Please," she whispered, "whatever happens to me, promise you'll protect my baby." Looking into her face, Jake made a decision that would either save them all or destroy everything he'd fought to become. The gunshot echoed across the snow-covered valley like thunder, shattering the Christmas morning silence. Sarah's scream caught in her throat as she watched Marcus crumple to one knee behind the overturned kitchen table, crimson spreading across his shoulder. "Stay down!" he shouted, clutching his wound while reaching for the rifle that had clattered across the floor. Through the shattered window, she could see 3 figures moving through the tree line, their dark shapes stark against the pristine snow. Detective Hayes had found them. Sarah's hands trembled as she pressed herself against the wall, her swollen belly making it difficult to stay low. The baby kicked frantically, as if sensing the danger surrounding them. Marcus had been right. Running should have been their first instinct. Now they were trapped like animals in their own sanctuary. "Marcus, you're bleeding too much," she whispered, seeing the way his face had gone pale. The bullet had torn through his shoulder, but she couldn't tell how deep the wound went. "I've had worse," he grunted, though his grip on the rifle wavered. "There's a root cellar behind the pantry. Hidden door behind the flour sacks. Take the emergency pack and—" Another shot splintered the doorframe above their heads, sending wood fragments raining down. Hayes's voice cut through the morning air, amplified by a megaphone. "Marcus Cole, you're surrounded. Send the woman out and we can discuss this like civilized people." Marcus let out a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. Civilized. That's rich coming from him. He met Sarah's eyes, and she saw something there that terrified her more than the bullets. Resignation. "Sarah, listen to me carefully. Hayes isn't here to arrest you. He's here to silence you permanently. The man you saw murder your husband, it wasn't just any corrupt cop. It was Hayes's partner, Detective Morrison. They've been running drugs through the county for years, using their badges as cover. Your testimony would expose the whole operation." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She'd known Hayes seemed too eager to find her, too insistent that she was dangerous. But this meant there was no escape, no justice, no safety anywhere. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked, though even as the words left her mouth, she understood. He'd been trying to protect her from the hopelessness of it all. "Because I hoped we had more time, hoped I could figure out another way." Marcus struggled to reload the rifle with one good arm. "But there's still a chance for you and the baby. The cellar connects to an old mining tunnel, follows the creek bed for about 2 miles before it opens up near the highway. I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice." His voice was firm despite his weakening state. "Hayes knows who I am now, knows about my past. Even if we survive this, they'll never stop hunting us." Through the broken window, Sarah could see the figures had moved closer. One of them was definitely Hayes. She recognized his stocky build and the way he moved with predatory confidence. The other 2 looked like hired muscle, not law enforcement. "Marcus," she said softly, "what you told me last night about your past, was any of it true?" He turned to look at her, and for a moment his hardened expression softened. The part about being alone for too long was true. The part about finding something worth protecting was true. He reached out with his good hand and touched her face gently. "And the part about falling in love with you, that was the truest thing I've ever said." Tears blurred her vision. "Then fight with me. We'll find another way." "Sarah, I need you to understand something." Marcus's voice was growing weaker, but his eyes remained steady. "My real name isn't Marcus Cole. It's Michael Carson. I was a federal witness in protection until 3 years ago, when my handler sold me out to the people I'd testified against. The man you see now, the life I built here, it's all borrowed time." The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Hayes hadn't just stumbled onto their location. He'd been hired to find Marcus, and Sarah's arrival had simply made the job easier. "That's why you were so scared when I showed up," she breathed. "You thought I was connected to them. And now I've dragged you into my nightmare." Another shot rang out, this one closer. "But unlike me, you still have a chance. Promise me you'll take it." Before Sarah could answer, she heard the crunch of boots on the porch. Hayes had stopped talking, which meant he was done negotiating. In seconds, they would storm the cabin. Marcus struggled to his feet, swaying but determined. Remember, pantry, flour sacks, hidden door, follow the tunnel to the highway and don't look back. Marcus, go, now. The front door exploded inward. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline world of white that stretched endlessly beyond the ranch. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching Marcus load supplies into the truck with methodical precision. Each movement spoke of a man preparing for war, and the realization sent ice through her veins that had nothing to do with the December cold. "You don't have to do this," she said, when he came back inside, snow dusting his shoulders like ash. Marcus paused in the doorway, his dark eyes finding hers across the room. "Yes, I do." The baby stirred restlessly in her arms, as if sensing the tension that had settled over the house like a shroud. 3 days had passed since Marcus's revelation about his connection to Viktor Kozlov, 3 days of careful planning and hushed conversations that stopped whenever she entered a room. She knew he was trying to protect her from the details, but the not knowing was worse than any truth could be. "Tell me what you're really planning," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Marcus removed his coat slowly, buying time. She could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the instinct to shield her warring against the respect he'd learned to show for her strength. "There's a shipment coming through the northern pass tonight," he said finally. "Victor's people use the old logging roads when the weather's bad. Less chance of running into law enforcement. And you know this because I helped establish the route. The admission came out flat, matter of fact, 3 years ago, before I got out, before I came here." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a piece of understanding clicking into place. "That's why you chose this ranch. It wasn't random." "No." Marcus moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. "I bought this place because I knew every entrance and exit point for 50 miles. I told myself it was just good strategy, know your enemy's movements. But maybe part of me always knew this day would come." The baby fussed, and Sarah automatically began the gentle swaying motion that had become second nature. "What happens when you intercept this shipment?" "I make Victor an offer he'll understand." Marcus turned to face her, and she saw something cold and dangerous flickering in his expression. "I give him something more valuable than his pride." "Marcus, no." The words came out sharper than she intended. "You can't trade yourself for us. That's not a solution. It's the only solution that guarantees your safety." "And what about your safety?" She stood, clutching the baby closer. "What about what I want? Don't I get a say in this?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. For weeks now, they'd been dancing around the feelings that had grown between them, the unexpected intimacy born from shared danger and quiet moments in the firelight. But there had always been an unspoken understanding that their situation was temporary, that she would move on once the threat passed. "Sarah." Her name came out rough, uncertain. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about you helping me and became about us." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. "I'm saying that if you throw your life away tonight, you're not just sacrificing yourself. You're sacrificing what we could be." Marcus crossed the room in 3 quick strides, stopping just close enough that she could see the conflict tearing him apart. "You don't understand what you're asking. The man Victor knows, the man I used to be, he's not someone you want to build a life with. I'm not asking you to be that man. I'm asking you to find another way." She reached out with her free hand, fingers brushing against his jaw. "There has to be another choice besides martyrdom." For a moment, Marcus leaned into her touch, and she saw the mask slip completely. Beneath the careful control and deadly competence was someone bone-deep, tired of running, tired of carrying his mistakes alone. "There might be," he said slowly, "but it would mean trusting people I swore I'd never involve in this mess." "Who?" "The FBI agent who helped fake my death. He's been waiting 3 years for me to deliver Victor to him." Marcus caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest where his heart hammered against his ribs. But if I make that call, there's no going back, no more hiding. Everything comes out. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling around them. Outside, the wind was picking up again, rattling the windows and promising another long night of winter's fury. But inside this small circle of warmth and possibility, she could see the future balanced on the edge of his decision. "Then maybe it's time to stop hiding," she whispered. The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the morning air like a blade. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she peered through the kitchen window, watching 3 black SUVs wind their way up the ranch road, kicking up clouds of dust in their wake. Behind her, the baby slept peacefully in his makeshift bassinet, oblivious to the danger bearing down on them. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He was already moving, checking the locks on his gun safe with practiced efficiency. "Take David and go to the root cellar behind the house. There's a hidden entrance under the old oak tree. Wait for my signal. I'm not leaving you to face them alone." Marcus turned, his eyes blazing with an intensity she'd never seen before. "This isn't a discussion, Sarah. Everything I've done, everything I've told you, it's all been to keep you safe. Don't make it meaningless now." The vehicles were closer now, maybe a quarter-mile out. Sarah could make out figures in the passenger seats and the glint of something metallic, weapons most likely. Her hands trembled as she gathered the baby, wrapping him securely in the blanket Marcus had given them that first night. "There's something else," Marcus said, his voice strained. "The ranch. It's not just a hiding place for me. It's a safe house. Has been for years. If something happens to me, there's a phone in the cellar. Speed dial 3. Tell them Marcus sent you." Sarah stared at him, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. "You're not just running from your past. You're still part of it." A grim smile crossed his face. "Some things you never really leave behind. You just learn to use them differently." The rumble of engines grew louder. Marcus pulled her close, his lips brushing against her forehead in a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Whatever happens, know that these last few days, they've been the most real thing in my life for longer than I care to admit." Sarah wanted to argue, to insist they could face this together, but the baby stirred in her arms, and she knew Marcus was right. David's safety had to come first. She pressed her hand against Marcus's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "Don't you dare say goodbye," she whispered fiercely. "This isn't over." She slipped out the back door just as the first SUV crested the final hill. The morning air bit at her skin as she ran toward the oak tree. David clutched protectively against her chest. Her fingers fumbled along the base of the massive trunk until she found what she was looking for, a cleverly concealed latch that opened to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The cellar was larger than she'd expected, clearly designed for extended stays. Emergency supplies lined the walls, and a sophisticated communication setup occupied one corner. Sarah settled into a chair, cradling David while straining to hear what was happening above. The sound of car doors slamming echoed across the property, followed by muffled voices. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. Then she heard Marcus's voice, calm and steady despite the circumstances. A sudden crash made her jump, something heavy hitting the front door or perhaps being thrown against it. David began to fuss, and Sarah rocked him gently, humming under her breath to keep him quiet. Every instinct screamed at her to go back, to help Marcus somehow, but she forced herself to stay put. The radio in the corner crackled to life. Sarah stared at it in confusion until she realized Marcus must have activated some kind of emergency beacon. A voice came through the static, crisp and professional. "Phoenix, this is Control. We're tracking multiple hostiles at your location. ETA on backup is 8 minutes. 8 minutes. Sarah closed her eyes, praying it would be enough time. Above her she heard the unmistakable sound of the front door splintering. Heavy footsteps thundered across the floor, and Marcus's voice rose in what sounded like an argument. Other voices joined in, at least 3 different men, maybe more. Then the argument escalated into something much worse. The first gunshot made Sarah cry out involuntarily. She clapped a hand over her mouth, terrified that she'd given away their location. David was crying now, and she pulled him closer, tears streaming down her own face as more shots rang out above them. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise had been. Sarah stared at the cellar ceiling, willing Marcus to give her the all-clear signal they'd discussed. But the minutes ticked by with no word, and her heart sank with each passing second. The radio crackled again. "Phoenix, respond. Phoenix, do you copy?" Sarah reached for the handset with shaking fingers, David still cradled in one arm. She had to know. Whatever the cost, she had to know if Marcus was still alive. The sound of footsteps directly overhead made her freeze, her hand hovering inches from the radio. Someone was in the kitchen now, moving with deliberate stealth. The sound of engines cut through the pre-dawn silence like chainsaws through velvet. Jake's eyes snapped open, his body already moving before his mind fully processed the threat. 3 vehicles, maybe 4, approaching fast up the mountain road. "Sarah." He shook her gently, his voice urgent but controlled. "We need to move. Now." She stirred, confusion clouding her features for a moment before reality crashed back. The baby kicked against her ribs as if sensing the danger, and she winced, pressing a hand to her belly. "How many?" she whispered, struggling to sit up. "Too many." Jake was already pulling on his boots, his movements efficient and practiced. "There's a hunting cabin about 2 miles north, hidden trail through the back canyon. Can you make it?" The engines grew louder, closer. Through the window, Jake could see the first glimmers of headlights snaking up the mountainside. His jaw tightened as he recognized the lead vehicle, Marcus Kellerman's black SUV, the one that had haunted his nightmares for 3 years. "Jake!" Sarah's voice trembled, but her eyes held steel. "What if we don't run this time?" He turned to stare at her, incredulous. "You're 8 months pregnant, Sarah. This isn't some movie where—" "Listen to me." She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "They'll never stop. Not Marcus, not the organization. Even if we escape tonight, there'll be another night and another. Our child will spend their entire life looking over their shoulder." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He'd been running for 3 years, and it had solved nothing. The ghosts of his past had finally caught up, and now they threatened the only good thing left in his world. "What are you suggesting?" he asked, though part of him already knew. "You said you used to be one of them. You know how they think, how they operate." Her eyes searched his face. "The evidence I took from Marcus's office. It's not just about me. It's about everything, all of it. Years of operations, offshore accounts, congressional payoffs, everything they've done." The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the valley. Jake peered through the curtain and counted 6 men moving with military precision toward the house. They had perhaps 3 minutes before the perimeter was secure. "Where is it?" he demanded. "The evidence?" "Hidden in the truck, behind the spare tire." She struggled to her feet, one hand braced against the small of her back. "Jake, if we can get it to the right people." "The right people?" His laugh was bitter. "Sarah, these organizations have reach you can't imagine. Federal judges, senators, bureau chiefs. There are no right people. Then we make our own justice." The simple statement, spoken with such quiet conviction, stopped him cold. For 3 years, he'd been the mouse in an endless game of cat and mouse, reactive instead of proactive. But Sarah was right. Running would only postpone the inevitable. A sharp knock at the front door made them both freeze. "Jacob Torres," called a familiar voice that sent ice through Jake's veins. Marcus Kellerman himself, not bothering with pretense or false names. "I know you're in there, and I know you have something that belongs to me." Jake's mind raced through possibilities, scenarios, escape routes. But every path led to the same conclusion. They were trapped unless he changed the rules of the game. "The cabin," he whispered to Sarah. "You still go. I'll buy you time." "No." Her response was immediate and non-negotiable. "We do this together." Another knock. more insistent now. "I'm a reasonable man, Jacob. I'm here to make a deal, the woman and what she took, in exchange for your freedom. You disappear again, and this time we don't follow." Sarah's hand found his, their fingers interlacing. In her touch, he felt something he'd thought lost forever, the possibility of a future worth fighting for. "There's a rifle in the bedroom closet," he murmured. "High-powered scope. You know how to use it?" She nodded once, her expression grim but determined. "The window upstairs has a clear view of the approach road. If this goes wrong, it won't." Her certainty surprised him, because we're not just running anymore. We're going to end this. The front door exploded inward with a thunderous crack. Heavy boots thundered across the threshold as tactical lights swept through the darkness. But Jake and Sarah were already moving, their desperate plan set in motion. As they slipped through the back door into the pre-dawn gloom, Jake felt something shift inside him. The hunted was about to become the hunter, and for the first time in 3 years, Marcus Kellerman was about to discover what happened when someone fought back. The war was just beginning. The frozen ground crunched beneath their feet as they made their way through the pre-dawn darkness toward the old truck. Sarah clutched the baby close to her chest, every shadow seeming to harbor a threat. Marcus walked slightly ahead, his rifle held ready, scanning the tree line that bordered his property. "How long do you think we have?" Sarah whispered, her breath forming small clouds in the bitter air. "Hard to say. Vincent's men are thorough, but they're also cocky. They'll expect us to run toward town, not deeper into the mountains." Marcus paused at the truck's driver door, listening. Nothing but the distant howl of wind through the pines. The engine turned over on the third try, coughing to life with a reluctant growl. Marcus had spent the past hour loading supplies into the bed, food, water, ammunition, and a bag of cash he'd kept hidden for years. Money from his time with Vincent, money he'd never been able to bring himself to spend. As they pulled away from the ranch, Sarah turned for one last look at the small house that had sheltered them. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for bringing this to your home. Don't be." Marcus kept his eyes on the narrow road ahead. That place was never really a home, just somewhere I was hiding. The baby stirred in Sarah's arms, making soft sucking sounds. She adjusted the blankets around him, marveling at how peaceful he seemed despite everything. "Where are we going?" "There's a cabin about 30 miles north. Off the grid, no roads leading to it. I used to use it when—" He stopped himself. "When you worked for Vincent?" "Yeah." Marcus downshifted as they began climbing into the foothills. "It's not much, but it's hidden. We can lay low there while I figure out our next move." Sarah studied his profile in the dashboard's green glow. "You don't have to do this, you know. You could drop us at the next town, walk away clean. Vincent doesn't leave loose ends. The moment he knows I helped you, I'm a dead man anyway." Marcus's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Besides, I made you a promise." They drove in comfortable silence for several minutes, the truck laboring up increasingly steep grades. Sarah found herself thinking about the past 3 days, how her world had completely shifted. When she'd first stumbled into that barn, she'd been running on pure desperation. Now, looking at Marcus's determined face, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. "Tell me about the cabin," she said. "Built it myself back when I thought I might need a place to disappear. Solar panels, well water, enough supplies to last months. Vincent doesn't know about it. I made sure of that. Sounds like you were planning to disappear for a while." Marcus was quiet for so long Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "There were things Vincent asked me to do toward the end. Lines I couldn't cross. I knew eventually I'd have to run. But you didn't. Couldn't. He had leverage on me, information that would have destroyed innocent people. So I stayed, and I did things—" His voice trailed off. "Things I can never take back." Sarah reached across the seat and touched his arm. "We all have things we regret. Not like this." Marcus's voice was barely audible over the engine noise. "You don't understand what I was, Sarah, what I'm capable of. I know you saved my life. I know you're risking everything to protect my son. That's what I understand. The headlights swept across a weathered sign marking the turn onto a logging road. Marcus slowed, checking his mirrors one more time before making the turn. The road was barely more than 2 tire tracks through the trees, forcing him to drive slowly to avoid the worst of the ruts and fallen branches. "Almost there," he said, tension evident in his voice. That's when Sarah saw the red glow through the trees ahead. Her stomach dropped. "Marcus!" He was already hitting the brakes, the truck sliding to a stop in the loose gravel. Through the windshield they could see flames licking at the night sky where the cabin should have been. Even from a distance, they could hear the crackle and roar of burning wood. They found it. Marcus's voice was flat, emotionless. "They're already here." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. How? How could they have known? Marcus stared at the burning cabin, his face grim in the firelight. "Because I underestimated Vincent again." He put the truck in reverse, backing carefully down the narrow road. He always was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. "So, what do we do now?" Marcus was already turning the truck around, his mind racing through options that seemed to be dwindling by the minute. "Now we find out just how badly Vincent wants you dead." The sound of sirens faded into the distance as Marcus held Elena close, her newborn daughter nestled between them. The barn that had sheltered so many secrets now bore witness to something pure, new life emerging from the darkness that had haunted them both. "They're gone," Marcus whispered against Elena's hair, feeling her body finally relax after hours of tension. Detective Sarah Chen had kept her word, leading Dimitri's men away with a carefully orchestrated chase that ended in their arrest 20 miles from the ranch. Elena lifted her head to look at him, her eyes bright with exhaustion and something else. Hope. What happens now? Before Marcus could answer, his phone buzzed. Sarah's voice came through clearly when he answered. "It's over, Marcus. We got all of them. Dimitri won't be bothering anyone ever again." The weight that had pressed down on Marcus's chest for 3 years finally lifted. He'd spent so long running from his past as an undercover DEA agent, hiding after his cover was blown, and Dimitri's organization put a price on his head. But Elena's arrival had changed everything, forcing him to remember who he used to be, someone who protected the innocent instead of just protecting himself. "Thank you," he said into the phone, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," Sarah replied. "Your testimony is going to put away the rest of their network. The Bureau wants to discuss bringing you back in, if you're interested." Marcus looked down at Elena, who was studying his face with those intelligent dark eyes that had captivated him from the moment she'd stumbled into his barn. "I'll think about it." After ending the call, he helped Elena stand, supporting her as they made their way toward the house. The snow had stopped falling, and dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "You never told me," Elena said softly as they reached the porch. "About being DEA." Marcus paused, his hand on the door. "I couldn't. For 3 years, I convinced myself that Marcus the rancher was real, that Agent Marcus Steele was dead. But when I saw what you were running from..." He turned to face her. "I remembered what it felt like to be someone who fought for justice instead of just surviving." Elena shifted the baby to one arm and reached up to touch his cheek. "Maybe Marcus the rancher and Agent Steele don't have to be different people. Maybe they can be one man who's learned that protecting what matters doesn't always mean hiding." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. For years, he'd seen his isolation as strength, his emotional distance as protection. But Elena had shown him that real strength came from opening yourself up to love, even when it meant risking everything. "I was thinking," he said, covering her hand with his, "this ranch is pretty isolated. Good place for someone to start over, build a new life. Are you asking me to stay?" "I'm asking you to let me love you. Both of you." He looked down at the baby, who had Elena's dark eyes and wisps of black hair. "I know it's complicated. I know you're still healing from everything David put you through. But I want to try, if you'll have me." Elena's smile was radiant, transforming her face from merely beautiful to luminous. I fell in love with a man who could have turned me away but chose to fight for a stranger instead. Whether his name is Marcus Steele or something else entirely doesn't matter to me." He kissed her then, soft and tender, tasting the salt of happy tears on her lips. When they broke apart, the baby made a small sound, and they both laughed. "She needs a name," Elena said. "What were you thinking?" "Hope." Elena looked up at him. "Her name is Hope." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. After years of believing his life was essentially over, that he was just marking time until Dimitri's people found him, he was being offered something he'd never thought possible, a future. "Hope Steele has a nice ring to it," he said. Elena's eyebrows rose. "Getting ahead of yourself, aren't you?" "Maybe," he admitted. "But I've learned that sometimes you have to take a leap of faith." As they entered the house together, Marcus caught sight of the Christmas tree he'd never bothered to decorate. Tomorrow, today really, since it was now Christmas morning, he'd ask Elena to help him make it beautiful. They'd start new traditions, build new memories. Outside, the first full day of their lives together was dawning, bright and clear and full of possibility. The past would always be with them, but it no longer had the power to define their future. For the first time in years, Marcus Steele was ready to stop running and start living.